An image to the beast. Some of the things which I'm going to be discussing in this lecture might not quite make sense to you. If it doesn't, I encourage you and I urge you to go back and get the other DVDs if you don't have them available, because I'm going to be running through information which is now based on previous things that we've discussed, and more specifically on the idea that the papacy is the Antichrist. If that doesn't make sense to you, or if you don't know what I mean by that, there's an entire lecture entitled Who is the Antichrist, where we did a biblical analysis on this. One of the texts that we read at the time was Revelation 13 verse 1. It says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns." This is the Antichrist beast which we've discussed. Out of these 10 horns arises another little horn, and that little horn is going to have all these various characteristics which we've shown over the past couple of lectures that this biblical prophecy has come true. Now I'm going to speed up. I'm going to assume that you understand this, you have the background, you got the knowledge, and I'm going to skip forward to Revelation 13 verse 7, where it says that this Antichrist beast, it says the following: "It will be granted to him," this Antichrist beast, "to make war with the saints and to overcome them." And throughout history, we've seen again and again and again the persecution that has taken place on the righteous, the people that believe to stand only on the word of God. And they, by every account, have taken the brunt of attack from this Antichrist beast. In one section in the history of New England, in chapter 3, paragraph 43, it says, "Hunted, persecuted, and imprisoned, they," in other words, the people that were fleeing from Rome, the persecuted people, "could discern in the future no promise of better days. And many yielded to the conviction that for such as would serve God according to the dictates of their conscience, England was ceasing forever to be a habitable place." In the European area, the papacy had taken control and was, in a most diabolical way, through the frontage of the Jesuit order, was persecuting anybody that stood on the Bible and the Bible alone. It's also written that when God's hand seemed to be pointing them across the sea to a land where they might find for themselves a state and to leave their children the precious heritage of religious liberty, they went forward without shrinking in the path of providence. These people who fled from this persecuting power of Rome fled in various directions. Some came to South Africa, some fled across to America. The people that traveled to America traveled on the first ship to cross, which was called the Mayflower. And in 1620, the Mayflower stopped and they got off the ship and knelt down on the seashore. As Wikipedia explains, the Pilgrims reached the coast of what is now Massachusetts on December 21, 1620. They named their little settlement Plymouth after the city that they had sailed from in England. And this was a happy place for them. They'd fled away from the persecution of Rome. They'd been able to travel halfway across the world, and now they were free. They were able to build up a country in which they could have 2 base constitutional ideas, things that would keep them free from the persecution of Rome. The one would be having religious freedom, and the other one would be having secular, or the freedom from a monarchy of the type that they've just come from Rome. These 2 major ideas, the separation of church and state, were also the founding principles on which America was set up. And this lecture is going to now look into prophecy and say, where does America fit into this? We've just seen in the previous lecture how the American system of false Protestantism is taking out this, what the Bible calls evil spirits, like frogs that catch their prey with their tongues, and the false prophet. This all stems out of America in prophecy. And John, when he's busy writing or taking down the visions that he sees while in vision in Revelation, he sees a period of 1260 years. He explains in Revelation 13 verse 3, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death." This is the Antichrist beast with its head wounded to death. And we know from our biblical research that we've done and the studies that we've done in these lectures, that in 1798, and remember that date, 1798, Berthier entered Rome and he abolished, he stopped, he cut off the papal power and the government that was the papacy, and he established a secular government. That's what the Encyclopedia Americana explains. Not only that, Revelation 19:11 says, after this something interesting happens. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. So here we have one beast, which we've identified, which has grown into the Antichrist power. And then Paul says, but hold on, I see another beast coming out of the earth. Right? Now, if you'll remember in our the dictionary of biblical terms that we referred to previously, we saw that horns represented kings and kingdoms. Beasts represented kingdoms or kings, right? And we also looked at the word seas. Seas, in biblical terms, the Bible has to tell us what the Bible means, and the Bible told us that seas or waters were multitudes and nations and peoples and tongues. So here is a beast that rises up out of the sea, a beast that rises out of the populated area, the peoples and the nations and the tongues, and that rises to become the Antichrist beast. And now, another beast that rises up out of the earth being the opposite of the sea. The sea being a populated area, people, nations, tongues, the earth being an unpopulated area, a place that is still uninhabited. So John sees another beast rising up out of an uninhabited area of the world. And this has 2 horns, 2 main beliefs that it is based on. John Wesley wrote something very interesting. He wrote in his notes about Revelation 15, in 1754, he wrote the following. He is not yet come, though. He is not yet come, though he cannot be far off. For he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast. Do you remember that period of 42 months? 1,260 days, 1 day for a year, 1,260 years. In 1754, John Wesley recognized that he was about 44 odd years before the rise of this power. And he says, the power hasn't come yet, but it can't be far off because it has to arise after the 42 months or the 1,260 years, which they knew at the time referred to 1798. So somehow this beast rises up, a beast being a kingdom or a new kingdom, a new country as it were, rising up out of an uninhabited area, and it's got something to do with the date 1798. Looking into the Declaration of Independence as written as the Constitution in United States, it says the following. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution in 1789 said, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. See, what they were doing is they were writing down and putting on black and white the reason why they had founded a country. They were fleeing from where? Europe. Why? To get away from the persecution. These were Protestants, the people that were protesting against the papacy. They'd identified the Antichrist, and they knew that they had to flee to the other side of the world to get away from Rome. And they said, from now on, Congress or the ruling party shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In other words, no longer will anyone tell me what I must and mustn't believe. Remember, Rome said that the person who believed that was a heretic, meaning own choice or deciding for what one will believe. Well, this idea became the foundation which was embedded in the Congress, in the Declaration of Independence, and in the Constitution as well. The Constitution ensured that the United States of America would be a land that would stay free from opposition and free from persecution, and most importantly, free from the oppression of the papacy. So what's this with 1798? Well, we just go and look in history and we'll see that there was a certain pattern to the rise of the United States of America as a country. In 1776, we have the first Declaration of Independence, the first real date of responsibility that we have to note. In 1783, the independence is actually acknowledged. In 1787, we have the Constitution which is framed. Now, which date are we looking for? 1798. Remember, the 1,260 years comes to an end in 1798 when Berthier entered France, right? And Wesley says, well, this beast, the second beast coming up out of the uninhabited area, is not yet come. So we're looking for 1798. 1787, the Constitution is framed. 1791, the Bill of Rights is added. And guess what? 1798, recognition by France. France was the world power at the time. That's like today, setting up a country and going to the United Nations and getting them to stamp your legal document to say, boom, you are now a country. That's what it would be in effect today. Recognition by the world's superpowers that you are an official country. That happened in America when? Beep, on the button, 1798. A fulfillment of prophecy? Absolutely. So what is America doing in this prophecy? Let's read what it says in Revelation 13, verse 11. And unfortunately, this is a very sad quotation because it says that this beast, which will have two horns and will rise up in independence away from, or this nation which will rise up in independence from Rome, it says in Revelation 13, verse 11, he spoke like a dragon. Question. Who's the dragon? The dragon is Satan. So here you have people that are running away from the persecuting power of Rome, and somehow this American nation will start to talk like Satan. Is that possible? It's going to start making some sounds like Satan? Well, let's read on. Revelation 13, verse 12. And he, the second beast, America, exercises all the power of the first beast before him. The first beast, do you remember who that was? The Antichrist. He created wars and he took over countries and he persecuted the saints. Well, this second beast is going to make the same noises. He's going to exercise the same powers as the Antichrist beast, as Rome. Not only that, it says, and he causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast. So this second beast is going to drive the entire globe to worship the papacy. Now, wait for a moment and just remember, why was America founded in the first place? Was to get away from the papacy. Now, the Bible is saying, but this country is going to start speaking like the dragon. It's going to exercise its power to get the whole world to bow down to the first beast. Unbelievable. This is a complete turnaround. This can't be. And then it explains in Revelation 13, verse 13, and he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying unto them that dwell on the earth, that they should what? Make an image to the beast. Revelation 13, verse 14. So here's a commandment, or in the vision, what we've just been through now is an explanation of how America would be involved in bringing down false fire from heaven and would deceive people into doing things that they shouldn't be doing via miracles and signs and lying wonders. Not only that, the second beast will say to the earth that they should make an image to the beast. And then it says in Revelation 13, verse 14, this beast is the one which had the wound by the sword and did live. In other words, the Antichrist beast. So here America is identifying that it will somehow make an image to the beast. In Revelation 13, verse 15, it says, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Do you remember in the previous lecture I showed you how the people that refused to bow down to the image of the beast in King Nebuchadnezzar's day were thrown into the fire? Those days are coming again. Except this time they're going to set up an image of the Antichrist beast, and this will be the requirement of mankind to bow down to this beast, this nation, this kingdom, and if they don't, they're going to be killed. That's why certain pastors like Rick Warren say, don't worry about prophecy. Don't try and figure out what prophecy is all about, because they are covering up the happenings that are going to take place on this earth. There are times coming on this earth like have never been seen before. So here's a prophecy about America coming out and how it's going to create an image and it's going to force the world to bow down to it. So it's got one beast coming out of the sea and one beast coming out of the earth. In Daniel 2, it explains, as I've said, about Nebuchadnezzar having this dream and having this statue built. He says in Daniel 2, verse 3, I've had a dream and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Do you remember what dream that was? The statue with the gold and the silver and the bronze and the iron? That was Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, etc., as we worked through time towards the end. It spanned the history from 606 BC into eternity. Well, in Daniel 3 verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar makes that image of gold, and he tells the people that they have to bow down, and he forces them to do so through the use of music and liturgy and getting excited about being involved in something emotional, rather than saying what Daniel said is, I will not bow down to this beast. I will not bow down to it, because the word of God says, I shall not have any graven images. So how does this fit together? Well, the one in Daniel is a typology of the one in Revelation. Because the Daniel image, interestingly enough, is 66 cubits. Now, 66 or 360 as it were, is a defining number in the Babylonian kingdom. 60 by 6 or 360 is the key to unlocking the mathematical equations of Babylon. The entire system of mathematics was set up at the time on that system. That's why we have 360 days in a year. We have 360 degrees in a circle. Obviously today this 360 has changed to 365 and a quarter, but that's where it came from. Today we have 360 degrees in a circle. 60 minutes in an hour, etc., etc. And this 60 degrees or 60 system, the mathematical of sixes, comes from Babylon. And interesting to see how the Antichrist is identified as having a system that finds itself in the 666. A perfect 60 cubits, as was the image in Daniel. The one is a typology of the other. Now, setting up an image, if America were to set up an image to the beast, it would require a couple of things. Firstly, it would require contradictions to the Constitution. Because America was founded because they ran away from Rome in the first place. So to set up an image to the beast, they would have to go back towards Rome. Number two, the wall between church and state would have to be removed. This idea that the church will no longer govern, that'll have to be taken down. Number three, a US world government would have to be in place because he enforces this worldwide. In other words, a new world order, which we'll look at in the next lecture. And then lastly, the United States would have to acknowledge and promote Rome's authority. So where they've come from Rome and run away, the Bible is saying that it'll set up an image. In other words, it'll acknowledge, and not only acknowledge, promote Rome's authority. Basically, the Bible is warning us that even though the United States Constitution has been set up as a godly institution, Satan will infiltrate it and he will twist it so that he controls the American laws in such a way that America becomes Rome's law enforcement arm. Now that's pretty freaky in itself, because that means that at the end of time, just as Satan is controlling the Vatican, he's also going to control the United States government. Now, to say that Lucifer, or Satan rather, controls the United States government is a very serious charge. And I'm going to have to move quite quickly through this lecture because there's a whole lot of stuff we're going to have to cover. But we'll have to look into this very, very carefully to make sure that what we are saying here is, number one, biblically accurate, and number two, that it is clearly and distinctive in its understanding of biblical prophecy, because this claim is very hard. Let's ask the nps.gov. These are the governmental websites in America. George Washington, who was he and why was he so important? They say of all the presidents of the United States, George Washington is the most celebrated. It says on Wikipedia that many things have been named in honor of George Washington. You've got Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, the state of Washington, George Washington University, the Washington Monument, George Washington Masonic National Memorial. Who was he? And why was he so important to America? Well, there's a claim. Some people say that he was a deist, and other people say he was a Christian. Well, critical elements of deism, or believing in the idea of deity, include the following: rejection of all religions based on books that claim to contain the revealed word of God. Number two, rejection of reports of miracles, prophecies, and religious mysteries. Number three, rejection of the Genesis story of creation and the doctrine of original sin, along with similar stories. If you're a deist, that's what you believe. Constructive elements of deism includes God existed and created the universe, or exists and created the universe. And human beings have souls that survive death. That is, there is an afterlife, and God will reward moral behavior and punish immoral behavior. This sounds like purgatory or some element of immortality continuing in life after death. Well, deism is just a different way of bundling a marketing plan of ancient pagan religions. And Washington, interestingly enough, was a deist, if you see it from the insider circles. He was a person who is now today referred to as the father of the nation. He's also very important in Masonic circles. Not only that, he was one of the highest Freemasons in the country. Even a couple of portraits exist of him in regalia, this Masonic regalia, which I'll show you in a couple of seconds. But I just need to stop the lecture for a moment and ask you, do you know what Freemasonry is all about? Because I've covered this in previous lectures, but I'm going to skip quickly through this to make sure that we don't miss how important this really is. I've covered this in depth in the lecture, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism, all roads lead to Rome. But let me just do a brief scan of this, that you once again have a clear understanding of who's in control of Freemasonry. Every Masonic lodge is a temple of religion, but Masonry has nothing to do with the Bible. In this religion, symbols have come to have two meanings, the esoteric and the exoteric. The esoteric meaning was the true or original meaning understood only by a few. The exoteric meaning was the invented or modified explanation intended for the many. Regarding the interpretation of their symbols, the initiate is intentionally misled by false interpretations, the true explication being reserved for the princes of Masonry of the high degrees. The religion of Masonry is the belief in Lucifer, the god of light and the god of good, and the equal of Adonai. Esoteric Masonry believes Lucifer is God, and he is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the god of darkness and evil. There are all the quotations from the highest Masonic sources themselves. If this comes as a surprise to you, I ask you and I urge you, please go back and look at that lecture and make sure who's saying it and why. Okay, so when the President of the United States is a high Freemason, in other words, he's serving the God of the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, who's he serving? Adonai or Lucifer? God or Satan? At the 33rd degree and thereabouts, he's serving Satan. And that's why when you see George Washington, you'll see him in his Masonic regalia. Here you have him on the left with the all-seeing eye of Lucifer over the Capitol Hill, and holding also his the building tools, where it says the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. And on the right, you've got another image of him with his Masonic regalia on. This is actually George Washington's personal Masonic apron. You see the sun symbol on there? And if you were to join those stars underneath the eye of Lucifer, you would have the Star of David, which is a symbol of the sun worship. Underneath that, you've got the compass and set square, and at the bottom, the black and white squares, and below that, the coffin, the order of death, also hinting towards this oath that they take where the cold arms envelop them and they say, may I look after these secrets until death. Now, are there any Freemasons at the top of the United States system? Absolutely. Well, George Washington was one of them, as you've just seen. Here's another one, Harry S. Truman. President Truman joined the Masons in 1909. On October 19, 1945, he was coronated a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. Now, at the 33rd degree, do you know who you're worshipping? Yes, you do. So here are two presidents that we know of that were Luciferic worshippers. Who else was there that were high Freemasons? Well, I haven't written down all of them. They are all available if you do the research, but here's just a couple. George Washington, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, Howard Taft, Warren Harding, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, as we've seen, Lyndon Johnson, Gerald Ford, George H.W. Bush, and George Bush today, William Clinton. And not only is George Bush a high Freemason, he's also a member of Skull and Bones, which we have explained is an order of death, where they do secret things, and it's pretty horrific. Let's have a look at the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. Here's an image of it. As you can see, it looks like it's got an obelisk in front. The steeple forms a type of obelisk form. 101 Callahan Drive, Alexandria. This is the interesting that they would put this Masonic National Memorial in Alexandria. Do you remember Alexandria in ancient times, where that comes from? Well, that's the house of paganism, the place where they had all the occult writings in one place, the Alexandrian library that burnt down. Well, here in the suburb of Alexandria, they built this national memorial. Interesting to see that it stands 333 feet tall. And if you calculate that in inches, it's 3,996 inches. Why is that important? Well, it's not important, it's just interesting. And you'll remember that occultism, it doesn't matter if it's the right eye, left eye, male, female, black, white, good, evil, makes no difference. That's why 9 and 6 doesn't really matter. It's just a male or female representation of the same thing. So this building is actually 3,666 inches tall in true occult language. You'll also remember that I showed you previously, you could, in the Bible it speaks in Ezekiel that you either face west and you worship Yahweh, or you turn your back on Yahweh and you face east and you worship the sun towards the east. And that Freemasonry, the Masonic temple, is actually an invert of that temple, the sanctuary of God. All you have to do is go onto Google Earth or some sort of satellite picture and look down onto the Masonic Memorial, and there you will see that it faces east in perfect alignment with the Masonic Lodge. Okay, so what about the George Washington Monument? Now, the monument is a large white-colored obelisk on the west end of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It's a United States presidential memorial. That's this spike or this obelisk device at the west end of this National Mall, right? How does this fit in? What's interesting about an obelisk? Well, let's read it together. In Egypt, the obelisk symbolized the sun god Ra and was said to be a petrified ray of the Aten, the sun disk. It was also thought that the god existed within the structure. Of the several functions of the pillar, or the obelisk, among early people, the Egyptian obelisk was worshipped as the dwelling place of the sun god. So here is the dwelling place of the sun god, supposedly from ancient times, at the west end of the mall. So go back onto Google Earth and zoom in onto this obelisk, and what you find is quite phenomenal. You'll find that the obelisk is exactly facing north, south, east, and west. It's not slightly off, it's not slightly this way, 100% in alignment with north, south, east, and west. Why is that important? Well, what you have to do is you have to understand the secret language of the occult system, and then all of these things start to make sense. Go and read on the inscriptions what is written on each side of this obelisk, this dwelling place of the sun god. Remember, the Bible says, don't bow down to the east, face west, don't turn your back and face the east. Well, on the north face of the obelisk in Washington, D.C., it speaks about the Joint Commission at the setting of the capstone, Chester A., Arthur W. Corcoran, etc., Corcoran at least, and carries on. On the middle face, it says, cornerstone laid on the better foundation, July 4th, 1848. Wada, wada, wada. On the south face, that speaks about chief engineer and architect Lincoln Casey, Colonel Corps of Engineers, etc., etc. So all this information is on the north, and the middle, and on the south face. Then you go around the side, and what does it say on the east face? It says, Laus Deo, which means, praise be to God in Latin. Isn't that interesting? On all the other sides, they've got all this information about what's happened and what it means. And then on the eastern side, where the Bible says, don't face east, it's sun worship, on the dwelling place of the sun god, it says, in Latin, praise be to God. So here's some interesting stuff going on. So let's look at the actual constructs of this obelisk. You'll see that it's just over 555 feet tall. And if you work that out, you'll see it works into 6,665 inches. Not only that, the thickness of the monument walls at the base are 15 inches thick. That works out to 180 inches. That is 60 plus 60 plus 60. It's also 18 inches thick at the observation level, the walls are. That's 6 plus 6 plus 6 inches. And then each side of the capstone base is 3 foot. 3 foot works out to 36 inches. That is 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6. These little things, how they start to fit together, actually become quite phenomenal. Out of 30 obelisks in the world, 7 of them are left in Egypt. Where are the others? Interesting, the number 13, the occult number 13. 13 of them are in Rome, and obviously in Rome in Italy. The Vatican obelisk, as you can see by this image, this is the one in the Vatican, St. Peter's Square, stands to a height of 25.37 meters tall, 320 tons, etc., etc., etc. So out of all of them, 13 of them are in Rome. Isn't that interesting? So what's this about this dwelling place of the sun god? Well, Alberto says that the obelisk is a 4-sided pillar facing the 4 corners of the earth. Well, I've shown you that that's true. At its peak is a pyramid. It represents a combination, now listen, of both religious and political power worldwide. It appears in Egypt and in the US and in the Vatican. To Jesuits, esoteric Masons, and the Illuminati, it secretly stands for the one world government. The obelisk represents the sun god Baal. So according to him, he's saying that that's why it's specifically north, south, east, and west, because it takes the 4 corners of the earth and it brings them together under one little point on top. And that represents the one world government, the coming together of all powers. And it's obviously got to do with the sun worship. Now, in 1517, 95 theses were nailed to the church door at Wittenberg. They were nailed to the church door by a certain Martin Luther. He had come to the realization that there were certain errors in the doctrines of Rome. There were certain things which were not quite right according to what he was studying in the Word of God. And he was able to understand that the angle of error constituted at that time for him 95 different things. And he wrote these down and he nailed them on the church door at Wittenberg. In 1534, the Jesuit system was founded by Ignatius Loyola. This was founded as a system to bring the Protestants that were following Martin Luther and all the others that also acknowledged that Rome was in error, the people that had broken away from Rome, to bring them back to Rome. Isn't it amazing to see that there's only 17 years difference between the initial nailing on the church door and the founding of Ignatius Loyola's Society of Jesus? Now, this Society of Jesus is, because they're using the name Jesus or Jesuits, it's assumed to be a Christian type of organization, right? Well, that's not quite correct. I've explained this previously, but in order to understand how this lecture fits together, I'd like to show you again. Here you have an image of a portion of the Jesuit extreme oath of induction. This is the oath of induction that you undergo when you become a Jesuit. It says, amongst other things, I declare and swear that His Holiness the Pope is Christ's vice-regent and is the true and only head of the Catholic or Universal Church throughout the earth. He says, or when you become a Jesuit, you swear that I will help and do my utmost to extirpate the heretical Protestant or liberal doctrines and to destroy all their pretended powers, legal or otherwise. I do further declare and promise that I will have no opinion or will of my own or any mental reservation whatsoever, even as a corpse or cadaver, but unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope and Jesus Christ. This is a military order that was put together by Ignatius Loyola. It's not a priestly order, it's a military order, and we'll confirm that in the next lecture. It's a military order. That's why the head of this system is the Jesuit general. He's the general of an army. Just because he's wearing a cloak type outfit does not mean that he's not giving orders. The orders are presented from the Jesuit general. He is the boss. I'll give you a picture of him now. This oath states that I will go to any part of the world whatsoever without murmuring and will be submissive in all things whatsoever communicated to me. I do further promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth. And that I will spare neither sex, age, nor condition. And that I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the wall, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. Do these sound like friendly people? Do they sound like people that are allowed to use the word the Society of Jesus? No. Well, this is a satanic order, which are using the garb of Christianity to hide themselves. It says in the Library of Congress, catalogue card number 6643354, that the ceremony of the inductions also has certain added information to it. Read this with me. It says, you have been taught to insidiously plant the seeds of jealousy and hatred between communities, provinces, and states that were at peace, and incite them to deeds of blood involving them in war with each other, and to create revolutions and civil wars in countries that were independent and prosperous, cultivating the arts and the sciences and enjoying the blessings of peace. To take sides with the combatants and to act secretly in concert with your brother Jesuit, who might be engaged on the other side, but openly opposed to that which you might be connected. Only that the church might be the gainer in the end, for the end justifies the means. So when you watch world politics today, and you see George Kerry or John Kerry versus George Bush, you don't actually know whether they're on the same side. And they are opposed to each other, and they have big heated debates about this and about that. You don't actually know if that's for the camera or not. And I'll get to that a little bit later in this lecture. The fundamental principle, however, of the Jesuit order is to destroy Protestantism, to literally take it out at the roots. But they don't just try and cover it up or block it like they did in the past. Now they infiltrate your organization, and they slowly turn it from the inside, that you will over time start to accept Roman Catholicism again. And this is done not at speed. In the case of the Anglican Church, they let it go for 500 years. They don't rush these Jesuits. They take their time. They know that their people are inside the system, and wherever they can, they're slowly guiding the ship back to Rome. But their fundamental principle remains the same, and it is to destroy Protestantism. Here's an excerpt from the secret plan by Leone, and it says the following. Protestantism is already wearing out and sinking to decay. Yes, we are destined to insult its last agonies, to march over its broken skeleton and scattered bones. Protestantism is becoming decomposed, it is falling to pieces. And there you see these images in the newspapers, Saturday, May 10th, 1997. Death of Protestantism foreseen. And who do you see? The Roman Catholic Church. It says there, he did not preach about the success and the future of the denomination. He preached a message about the failure of Protestantism and its forthcoming destruction. Interestingly, at the International Conference of Parish Clergy in April in Atlanta, 3 speakers shared his assessment. Dr. Ben Johnson, a professor at Columbia Theological Seminary, said, "We are seeing the ending of Protestantism as it is known, and we do not know what will follow." Dr. John Hall of the United Church of Canada said, "We are witnessing the demise of Protestantism." And the nationally known author Tom Oden wrote, "Our Protestant assumptions have been wrong." A complete turnaround of the fundamental principles on which America was built is rotting away at the roots. Further on it says, "The word of the Lord told us that we are witnessing what we are witnessing is the end of an era, that God is restoring his temple, and that there would be a priesthood, an episcopacy that was in apostolic succession, a main difference between Protestant faith and Catholicism." Mr. Adler said that after the sermon, he stood up to give a prophetic word, but he fell on the floor and wept for 45 minutes. Then he said, "We all sensed what God was saying to us. We are witnessing the end of Protestantism. God's church is Catholic," he declared. "It was Catholic in the beginning, and it will be Catholic in the end." So does it sound like these infiltrations have taken place and that it's turned it around successfully and bringing it back to Rome? Absolutely. Popery, Puseyism, and Jesuitism by the writer Luigi Descantis says, "At what then do the Jesuits aim? If you examine the facts, you will find that they aim at universal dominion alone. They have rendered themselves indispensable to the Pope, who without them could not exist. They have rendered themselves indispensable to governors and hold revolutions in their hands. In this way, either under one name or the other, it is they who rule the world." And then regarding the history of the Jesuits, Michelangelo Tumberini, who was the general of the Jesuits in 1720, he said this phenomenal thing. "See, my lord, from this room I govern not only Paris but China. Not only China, but the whole world without anyone knowing how it is managed." And today, Peter Hans Kolvenbach, who's seen as the black pope, not because he's black skinned, but because he wears black, is the Jesuit general, the general of the Jesuit army, the secret infiltrative army that go into Protestantism, break it down at the core and bring it back to Rome. Romanism says, the Roman Catholic Lafayette warned, "It is my opinion that if the liberties of this country, the United States of America, are destroyed, it will be by the subtlety of the Roman Catholic Jesuit priests, for they are the most crafty, dangerous enemies to civil and religious liberty. They have instigated most of the wars of Europe." Interesting, because they say that it is the Jesuits who use this Hegelian principle where you've got thesis and you put antithesis or antithesis and you rub them together, you create wars in order to create synthesis or synthesis. It's also explained in the Grand Design, exposed that the truth is that the Jesuits of Rome have perfected Freemasonry to be their most magnificent and effective tool, accomplishing their purposes amongst Protestants. So how do these world wars fit together? For that, we've got to go back to the top of the organization. Always got to go back to the highest sources. Albert Pike, who's a 33rd degree Freemason, who was the most famous and most influential Freemason of all time, he wrote a letter to Mazzini dated August 15, 1871, in which he outlined the plans for 3 world wars that were seen. He had to have 3 in order to bring about the one world order. This letter was on display for a short time at the British Museum Library in London. It was copied by William Guy Carr, former intelligence officer in the Royal Canadian Navy, before it was then taken away. What was written in this letter to Mazzini? It states the following, that there will be 3 world wars required to drive the world towards a one world order. Not only that, this will bring in the ability to control the world under a single government. Well, we know that the First World War, according to this letter, was to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia, the protector of the Orthodoxy, and bring about an atheistic communist state. That was what was written in 1871 by Albert Pike. The First World War was to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia. Did that happen? Absolutely. Did it bring about a communist state? Absolutely. This letter says that there'll be a second war and it'll originate between the Great Britain and Germany to strengthen communism as an antithesis to Judeo-Christian culture and bring about a Zionist state in Israel. Did that happen? Absolutely. What about number 3? This letter written in 1871 states that there'll be a third world war and it'll be a Middle Eastern war involving Judaism and Islam and spreading internationally. Isn't that incredible? It hasn't happened yet, but you just have to watch the noises with Iran and the Middle East and something to do with Islam and terrorism, how this might possibly be the fulfillment of this Hegelian principle, the final third world war that they're busy building up to at the moment. This has been planned since 1871. It's 138 years, 136 years already that this has been planned. We'll continue on this journey of uncovering how America is a fulfillment of prophecy in the Bible in the second half. We'll be going into various of their symbols, of their statues, of their monuments, and see what really is going on and how America is busy building an image to the beast.